He told me to leave. I told him I built that floor. The July heat hit like a slap as Sandra Bell stepped off the city bus and into the shimmering sprawl of the North Dallas auto strip. Glass-fronted showrooms gleamed in the sun, everyone a temple to horsepower and vanity. She adjusted the strap of her purse and clutched the brown paper bag tight. Cody's lunch. Turkey sandwich, dill chips, 2 cookies she'd baked last night even though the oven had made the whole apartment sweat. Inside the dealership, the air conditioning whooshed like money. The scent of new leather and coffee pods hit her first. The floor tiles gleamed so bright she could almost see herself reflected. Her faded jeans, her plain blouse, her sneakers soft from years of use. She'd worked in places like this before. Back office jobs where nobody remembered your name until payroll day. But this one was Cody's place. Her boys. She spotted him immediately. Center stage, framed by a luxury SUV. His posture was confident, his voice smooth and sure as he talked to a man in a tailored suit. The client laughed, clapping Cody on the shoulder. Sandra's chest swelled with something complicated, pride tangled with distance. He looked like someone who belonged here. She hesitated near the showroom door, waiting for him to notice her. Maybe during a lull. Maybe he'd flash that grin and wave her over. She could already hear herself teasing. Still closing them with that same smile, huh? But when his eyes finally found hers, the smile didn't come. His expression froze mid-sentence. He blinked once, then twice, as if he couldn't believe she was real. The words he'd been saying trailed off. The client glanced back, confused. Sandra lifted the lunch bag a little, half smiling. "Thought you might be hungry," she said softly. Cody's jaw worked. He excused himself quickly, every movement sharp and practiced. The client's amusement faded as Cody crossed the tile, his polished shoes tapping like punctuation marks. "Mom," he hissed under his breath, stopping just short of her. "You can't just show up here like this." Her smile faltered. "Like what? I brought you lunch." He looked around, scanning for witnesses. His neck reddened above the collar of his white dress shirt. "We've talked about boundaries," he said, voice low but tense. "You can't just—" Before she could answer, Tamara appeared, her heels crisp against the floor. Perfect hair, tight blazer, eyes already rolling. "Oh," she said, lips curling. "Didn't realize we were hosting family picnics now." Sandra's face went hot. "This isn't a soup kitchen, Mrs. Bell." Tamara cut in with a bright, poisonous smile. "Customers pay good money to feel exclusive." Cody's hand brushed Tamara's arm. "Tam, not now." Sandra could feel the heat in her throat, the sting behind her eyes. She wanted to say something sharp, something that would slice through the shame, but all that came out was a shaky breath. She looked at Cody, her Cody, who used to eat sandwiches in her car between jobs, who used to brag about how she taught him everything he knew about financing a deal, and saw nothing of that boy left. He glanced at the paper bag in her hand, then back at her face. His voice softened, just a little. "Please, Mom, just go." For a second, she couldn't move. The lights seemed too bright, the air too thin. She placed the lunch bag gently on the nearest counter. "Don't worry," she said quietly. "It won't happen again." Cody exhaled through his nose, already turning back toward the client. Tamara whispered something in his ear that made him wince, but he didn't look back. Sandra walked out through the glass doors, the sound of laughter from inside chasing her into the parking lot. The Texas sun hit harder now, burning through her thin blouse. She stood there a moment, staring at the reflection of the dealership's logo in the glass. Bold silver letters that seemed to spell out everything she wasn't. Then she turned toward the bus stop down the block, her shoes scuffing the sidewalk. Somewhere behind her, she imagined the lunch bag sitting lonely on the counter, still warm from her kitchen. By the time she reached the corner, her hands had stopped trembling. But something deeper had started to shake loose inside her. Something small, sharp, and alive. And it wasn't going back to sleep. The heat pressed down harder now, the kind that glued fabric to skin and made even breath feel heavy. Sandra's shadow wobbled across the cracked sidewalk as she walked, head down, purse strap cutting into her shoulder. Each step away from the dealership felt like dragging a chain she hadn't realized she was wearing. At the corner trash can, she paused. The brown paper bag sat limp in her hand, its top wrinkled where her fingers had clenched it. The faint smell of turkey and mustard still leaked through the folds. She stared at it a moment longer, jaw tight. Then she dropped it in. The sound was barely a thud, but it landed like a verdict. The bus rumbled past without stopping, its brakes squealing, windows full of strangers. She didn't even lift her hand to wave it down. The stop sign shimmered in the distance, a mirage she suddenly had no energy to reach. Across the street, the neon sign of Loretta's diner blinked in the heat. Red letters that had been half dead for a decade. Sandra crossed against the light, cars honking as she went, not caring. The bell above the diner door jingled weakly when she stepped inside. Air conditioning met her like grace. The place smelled of bacon grease and burnt coffee, the soundtrack of 100 early mornings she and Loretta had worked side by side, swapping gossip and bills they couldn't quite pay. Loretta Chase was wiping down the counter, her silver hair tucked under a blue bandana. She looked up the instant Sandra entered, her sharp eyes narrowing in that way she had when she already knew half the story. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she said, but her tone was careful. Sandra slid onto a stool, purse still on her shoulder. "Hot out there," she murmured. Loretta poured coffee into a chipped mug, black and steaming. "You walked from the dealership, huh?" Sandra's fingers curled around the mug. "Bus was late." "Uh-huh." Loretta leaned on her elbows, the rag dangling from one hand. "I saw you cross the street. Saw him too. That boy of yours has got himself quite the stiff jaw these days." Sandra's throat tightened. She stirred the coffee, though there was nothing in it to stir. "It was nothing." Loretta raised a brow. "Nothing looked like you leaving there looking ready to swing a wrench through somebody's windshield." A brittle laugh escaped Sandra before she could stop it. "You always were dramatic." "Maybe," Loretta said. "But I also know when a woman's been humiliated in public by her own flesh and blood." Sandra's eyes flicked up, sharp now. "He's just stressed, that's all. They got sales targets, fancy clients. He doesn't need his mom showing up with sandwiches." Loretta crossed her arms, unimpressed. "And you don't need to make excuses for him. Man's 34, not 13. The words hung between them, heavy as the ceiling fan's slow rotation. Sandra looked down at the counter, counting coins from her purse. Quarters, dimes, nickels, shiny and dull together, like the years she'd traded for a son who now couldn't bear to claim her. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but it carried an edge that hadn't been there before. "You ever notice," she said, "how pride's like sunburn? You don't feel it right away. You just wake up later and it hurts everywhere." Loretta leaned closer, resting her forearms on the counter. "You gonna let him get away with that?" Sandra looked past her friend, through the diner window, where the dealership shimmered across the road like something behind glass. Beautiful, untouchable. Her lips curved, not quite a smile. "I'm not sure yet." Loretta studied her face, then poured another inch of coffee into the cup. "Well," she said softly, "when you decide, I'd hate to be standing in his shoes." Outside, thunder grumbled somewhere beyond the sun, a low warning swallowed by the heat. Sandra didn't flinch. She just sipped her coffee, the bitterness grounding her, and watched the reflection of her own tired eyes in the window. They didn't look tired anymore. The thunder that had grumbled earlier finally gave way to a steady drizzle, fat drops tapping the diner windows like fingers impatient for a story to start. The afternoon crowd had thinned to a few retirees nursing coffee and a trucker half asleep in a booth. The air smelled of rain mixing with fry oil, something sour-sweet and familiar. Sandra sat where she'd been for nearly an hour, her second refill cooling untouched. Her purse lay open beside her, a few crumpled bills visible like a confession. Loretta kept glancing her way from behind the counter, pretending to stack pie plates. "You keep staring out that window," Loretta said finally. "You'll burn a hole clean through that dealership sign." Sandra blinked, pulled herself back to the present. "Just thinking." "Uh-huh. That's what you say when you're not ready to talk." Before Sandra could answer, the diner door jingled open, letting in a gust of wet air and the sharp scent of expensive cologne. A man stepped inside, late 50s, trim suit darkened at the shoulders from rain, posture crisp despite the weather. He shook off his umbrella with practiced ease and surveyed the room like someone who owned every square inch of it. Loretta straightened immediately, smile snapping into place. "Afternoon, Mr. Nash. Coffee?" Sandra turned slightly at the name. Alvin Nash, the dealership owner. She'd seen his face on framed awards lining the walls across the street, Texas Dealer of the Year twice over. "Sure thing, Loretta," Alvin said, his voice low, smooth, the kind that carried weight without volume. He moved toward the counter, glancing around, and then his gaze caught Sandra. He paused mid-step, studying her the way a man studies something he almost recognizes but can't quite place. "Don't I know you?" he asked. Sandra's instinct was to look away, to disappear into her coffee cup, but instead she lifted her chin. "Used to work accounts at Auto First," she said softly. 1999 to 2012. Something flickered in his eyes. He tilted his head, searching the memory. "That was back when they still balanced ledgers by hand," he said slowly. "You... Bell, right? Sandra Bell?" She gave a small nod, unsure whether to feel exposed or seen. "That's right," Loretta beamed, leaning on the counter. "She ran that back office like a war room," she said proudly. "Could find a missing penny in a $1 million file. Whole place fell apart after she left." Alvin chuckled, the sound warm but measured. "I remember that. You were the one who kept that crew from drowning in paperwork. Always thought you should have been running the place." Sandra let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Compliments weren't common currency in her life anymore. "Didn't have the right degree," she said, almost to herself. "Sometimes degrees just mean you know how to sit still for 4 years," Alvin replied, sliding onto the stool beside her. He took the coffee Loretta poured, nodding his thanks before turning back to Sandra. "So what are you doing across the street these days?" The question landed like a test. Sandra hesitated. The truth, that she'd been escorted out of that same building less than 2 hours ago, tasted bitter. "Just visiting," she said instead. "My son works there." Alvin stirred his coffee, eyes narrowing slightly. "Cody Bell." Sandra looked up, startled. "You know him?" "Of course," he said with a hint of wryness. "Sales manager, polished, ambitious, talks like he's already running the company. Didn't know he had family in the business." Loretta gave a knowing snort. "He doesn't like to advertise it." Sandra shot her a look, but the damage was done. Alvin's gaze lingered on Sandra's face, reading between lines she hadn't spoken. He wasn't a man who missed much. His eyes were the kind that weighed, measured, remembered. "He's your boy?" Alvin asked quietly. Sandra nodded once, a slow, almost reluctant movement. For a moment, Alvin said nothing. Rain pattered harder against the windows, and the hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence. Then he spoke again, softer this time. "You know, it's funny. I've been around a lot of salesmen. Some build their ladders, some climb whatever's left standing, but usually you can tell which kind they are by the ground they came from. Sandra met his gaze, steady now. And which kind is he? Alvin smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. That's what I'm trying to figure out. He dropped a 10 beside his coffee cup, nodded to Loretta, and headed toward the door. But before stepping out into the rain, he looked back at Sandra. Good seeing you again, Mrs. Bell. I don't forget good workers. The bell jingled behind him, and the door swung shut. Sandra watched his reflection fade in the rain-streaked window, her pulse quickening for reasons she couldn't name. Loretta leaned close, her voice low and certain. He remembered more than he said. Sandra traced her finger around the rim of her mug, feeling the tremor in her hand. Outside, the dealership lights blinked through the rain like a beacon, and for the first time all day she didn't look away. The rain had stopped by early evening, but the street still glistened under the dealership lights, long strips of silver reflecting passing headlights. Sandra stood at the bus stop again, arms folded, collar of her blouse damp from the humidity. The buses were running late, as usual. She didn't mind. Waiting felt easier than walking home with her thoughts. A black sedan slowed beside the curb, window gliding down with a soft hum. Alvin Nash leaned across the console. You need a lift? Sandra blinked, startled. Mr. Nash. Call me Alvin, he said. And yes, I'm sure. You're not waiting on that bus in this steam bath. She hesitated, glancing down the street. The bus was nowhere in sight, and the air was thick as soup. Pride had kept her upright all day. Maybe, just this once, she could let practicality win. She nodded and climbed in. The interior smelled of cedar and faint tobacco. Clean, deliberate, masculine. The leather seats were cool against her skin. Alvin pulled smoothly into traffic, his hands steady on the wheel. They drove in silence at first, city lights passing over their faces like slow-moving ghosts. Sandra's apartment wasn't far. Oak Cliff, just across the Trinity. But the distance between their worlds stretched miles wider. So, Alvin said after a minute, voice calm but curious, you still live around here? Off Jefferson, she said. Small place, upstairs unit. He nodded, glancing briefly at her. You still doing finance work? Here and there. Temporary gigs mostly. Payroll cleanups, data entry. Keeps the lights on. He didn't comment right away. The sound of the tires on wet pavement filled the quiet. I looked up your file after I left the diner, he said finally. Auto First's old system still shows your name on a dozen audit templates. You built the framework most of the dealerships in this region still use. Sandra gave a soft laugh. Guess that's my legacy. Spreadsheets nobody remembers. I wouldn't say that. He glanced at her again, eyes sharper now. You're the reason your son knows the auto game. He learned it watching you. She turned toward the window, watching streetlights blur into gold streaks. He's embarrassed by me, she said quietly. The way I live, the way I talk. He thinks if he cuts me out, he can climb faster. Alvin's jaw flexed as he slowed for a red light. I hate disloyalty, he said simply. Doesn't matter what form it takes. The words hung heavy between them. Sandra didn't answer. There was nothing to say that didn't sound like an excuse, and she was done making those. When they reached her building, a squat, aging complex with paint peeling at the corners, she gestured toward the curb. This is me. Alvin parked and turned off the engine. The silence after the motor stopped felt intimate. Mind if I walk you up? He asked. It's not much to see, she said, but he was already out of the car. She led the way up a narrow staircase that groaned under their steps. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and someone's overcooked dinner. Inside her apartment, a single fan rattled in the corner, pushing around warm air. The furniture was neat but worn, everything in its place because there wasn't room for anything out of place. Alvin stepped in, surveying the room with quiet respect rather than pity. "You live alone?" "Always have," she said. "After my husband passed, it was just me and Cody. He was 12 then. Learned to fix things around here before he learned to drive." Alvin nodded slowly, his gaze landing on a faded photo on the wall. Cody at 16, grinning beside a used Mustang. "You must have done something right," he said. Sandra shrugged, uneasy. "He's got talent. Just not much heart left in it." Alvin turned back to her, expression unreadable. "Talent without loyalty burns out fast." He took a small card from his jacket and set it on her table. "I could use a hand at the dealership. Someone who understands the bones of the business, not just the shine." Her brow furrowed. "You mean a job?" "Part-time, for now. Admin and file organization, a little auditing. No announcements, no politics. Just you doing what you do best." Sandra stared at the card. His tone was matter-of-fact, not generous. This wasn't charity. It was trust being quietly extended across a fragile bridge. "I don't want any special treatment," she said finally. Alvin gave a faint smile. "Wouldn't offer it if it were." The fan rattled again, louder this time, like a mechanical applause. Sandra's throat felt tight. "When would you want me to start?" He adjusted his cufflink. "Monday. Don't be late. First impressions still count, even for people who've already made them." He stepped to the door but paused before leaving. "Sandra," he said, his tone softening, "don't ever apologize for being the ground someone stands on. Just make sure they remember who built it." The door clicked shut behind him and his footsteps faded down the stairs. Sandra sat at her tiny kitchen table staring at the business card gleaming under the yellow light. Outside, the rain started again, quiet, steady, relentless. And for the first time in years, it didn't sound sad. Monday mornings at Nash Automotive were all about performance. The clean suits, the showroom gleam, the coffee brewed strong enough to disguise exhaustion. Cody Bell pulled into the lot 20 minutes late, sunglasses on, Bluetooth earpiece blinking like a badge of self-importance. He killed the engine, smoothed his tie, and checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. Managerial enough. He practiced the easy grin he gave clients, confident, rehearsed, untouchable, and headed inside. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and tension. Someone was already fielding calls behind the front desk, voice calm, methodical. A familiar rhythm to the typing echoed through the reception area. For a brief, impossible second, Cody thought he was imagining it. Then he turned the corner. There she was, Sandra Bell, his mother, sitting at the admin desk just outside his office, headset in place, neatly stacking client folders by VIN number. Her blouse was pressed, hair pulled back, every movement efficient and quiet. For a moment, the air left his lungs. "What the hell is this?" he blurted, the words too loud for the sterile calm of the dealership floor. Sandra didn't look up. "Good morning to you." "Too." She slid a file into a drawer, clicked a pen, moved on. "Mom," Cody hissed, stepping closer, voice low and dangerous now. "Why are you here?" Before she could answer, a familiar baritone cut through the air. "Morning, Belle." Cody turned. Alvin Nash stood a few feet away, holding a coffee cup and scanning the dealership floor like a general surveying his troops. His gaze flicked between them with faint amusement. "Didn't know you had such good bloodline, Belle," Alvin said. "You could have mentioned your mother was in the business." Cody's face drained of color. "Sir, this must be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding." Alvin took a sip of coffee. "I hired her. Part-time admin support. We're reorganizing the finance archives, and she's got more experience in that department than anyone on payroll. But she's..." Cody's words jammed in his throat. "She's family." Alvin raised an eyebrow. "And?" I like keeping good people close. The line landed hard. A few sales reps glanced over, pretending not to listen while pretending exactly that. Cody forced a smile, shallow and brittle. Of course, sir. Just surprised, that's all. Get used to it, Alvin said mildly, and strode away, clipboard under one arm. Cody turned back to Sandra, his voice dropping to a hiss. You had no right to come here. She met his gaze evenly. He offered me a job. I took it. You're not the only Belle who knows how to work. Cody leaned in, jaw tight. You're embarrassing me. Then maybe don't make it so easy, she said quietly, returning her focus to the spreadsheet on her screen. For the rest of the morning, the air between them stayed brittle. Every time Cody walked past her desk, he felt eyes on him, not hers, but the staff's, watching to see who would crack first. He fumbled a presentation call, snapped at a junior rep, and spilled coffee on his tie before 10:30. At 11, his phone buzzed. Tamara. He stepped into the break room and answered. Hey babe, can we not right now? What the hell is she doing there? Tamara's voice came sharp through the line. Kara just texted me. Your mother is sitting at the front desk like it's her office. Cody rubbed his temple. It's not like that. Nash. He hired her. Some temp thing. Well, fix it, Tamara snapped. You're a manager, aren't you? Make it stop before everyone in that building thinks you're still living off her casseroles. The line went dead before he could respond. He stood there a moment, breathing hard, staring at his own reflection in the stainless steel fridge. The man looking back didn't seem quite as polished anymore. By noon, Alvin called him into his office. The blinds were half closed, the tone of the room serious. Sit, Alvin said. Cody obeyed. I've been watching your floor performance, Alvin began. Sales are fine, but morale isn't. A good manager leads by steadiness. Lately, you've been reactive. Cody stiffened. I've been under a lot of pressure. So has everyone, Alvin cut in. That's the job. But there's a gap, son. A leadership gap. He leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. You'll step back for a while. Focus on sales again. Sandra will handle administrative oversight while we restructure. For a moment, Cody didn't understand the words. They slid over him like static. Then they landed. You're demoting me? He asked, stunned. Temporary adjustment, Alvin said. Until we see some growth. Cody's voice cracked. You're replacing me with my mother? Alvin's gaze stayed level. No. I'm reminding you where you came from. The meeting ended there. Cody stepped out into the corridor, face pale, the buzz of fluorescent lights suddenly too loud. At her desk, Sandra was answering phones, polite and composed. Her pen moving in smooth, sure lines. She didn't look up when he passed. He stood there for a long second, words bubbling up and dying unspoken. Because for the first time in years, he didn't have a script. And she, the woman he'd told to leave, was the one running the floor. Cody Bell hadn't slept. The clock on his nightstand had clicked past 3 a.m. before exhaustion dragged him under, and even then his dreams had teeth. Phones ringing, papers shuffling, his mother's calm voice echoing over his own. By the time he reached the dealership Tuesday morning, the air already buzzed with gossip. He felt it in the way conversations dipped when he passed, the way eyes flicked toward the admin desk, toward her, Sandra. She sat behind the same workstation, perfectly composed, headset in place, typing with quiet authority. Not deferential, not smug, just steady, like she belonged. Cody yanked off his sunglasses and strode past, pretending not to notice. He'd told himself a dozen times on the drive over that this was temporary, that Alvin would come to his senses. But the word demoted still pulsed behind his temples like a bruise. He stopped in Alvin's doorway. Got a minute? Alvin didn't look up from his laptop. Make it quick, Belle. I just want to clear the air, Cody said, forcing a controlled tone. My mother being here, it's creating tension. It's awkward for everyone. She's not creating tension? Alvin finally looked up, eyes calm but sharp. She's been here one day and has already reorganized the vendor files your department ignored for 6 months. Cody blinked. Sir, Alvin rose from his chair, picked up something from his desk, a shiny new employee badge. He walked right past Cody and handed it to Sandra. Full access, he said to her. If anyone gives you trouble with accounts or paperwork, tell them to come to me. Sandra took it, surprised. Thank you, Mr. Nash. Alvin smiled faintly. You earned it. He turned back to Cody. Belle, focus on clients. Let operations handle itself. Cody's jaw tightened. Let operations handle itself. The words scraped. By mid-morning, his frustration had curdled into something bitter. Every conversation he had with a sales rep felt forced. Every pitch sounded hollow. The more he tried to reassert control, the more invisible he felt. Then came Tamara. The glass doors whooshed open, and she swept in like a storm front. Designer sunglasses, hair perfect, heels sharp against the tile. Heads turned instantly. Excuse me, she said, voice rising as she reached the front desk. Can someone explain why my husband's mother is sitting here like she runs the place? Sandra looked up slowly, her tone measured. Good morning, Tamara. Don't you good morning me, Tamara snapped. This is ridiculous. Cody is a manager and you're, what, the receptionist now? The room froze. Even the phones seemed to pause mid-ring. Sandra stood, smooth and unhurried. Tamara, this is a workplace. You're causing a scene. I'll cause whatever scene I want. Tamara shot back. You're embarrassing him. A man in a dark suit, dealership security, stepped discreetly closer. Sandra caught his eye and nodded once. Please escort Mrs. Bell to the exit. Tamara's mouth fell open. You can't. But she could. And she did. The automatic doors whispered shut behind Tamara's furious silhouette, leaving behind a stunned silence. Sandra adjusted her headset, sat down, and resumed typing. From the far side of the showroom, Cody felt the heat crawl up his neck. He wanted to disappear. Instead, he stormed into his office, slammed the door, and called one of his biggest clients, a doctor looking to buy a new luxury SUV. He'd show them. He'd close this deal blindfolded. But as the conversation dragged on, his rhythm faltered. The doctor's tone cooled. Cody oversold, stumbled on a financing detail he should have known by heart. The client thanked him politely and said he'd think about it. Call ended. Sale lost. He stared at the dead phone, pulse pounding. Through the glass wall of his office, he could see Alvin standing near the service bay, arms folded, watching everything. Not intervening, not angry, just observing. That was worse. Because Alvin's silence wasn't indifference. It was calculation. Cody turned away from the window, hands gripping the desk edge. He could feel the walls closing in. The whisper of co-workers, the echo of Tamara's outrage, the steady clicking of Sandra's keyboard outside. Everything that used to define him, his title, his authority, his spotless image, was slipping through his fingers. And she didn't have to lift a single finger to take it. Outside his office, Sandra answered another call, her voice even and cool. Good afternoon, Nash Automotive. How can I help you? Her tone carried just enough calm to sound like control, and for the first time, Cody wondered if this was how it felt. Not to fall, but to watch someone else rise. The following Friday, the dealership buzz had cooled, but not for Sandra. Her desk had become a quiet center of gravity. Paperwork flowed through her hands, and problems that once tangled departments now vanished with quiet efficiency. Even Alvin seemed to orbit closer to her workspace than before, pausing now and then to ask questions he already knew the answers to. When his assistant appeared mid-morning with a note, "Lunch? 12:30. Perry's. My treat." Sandra's first instinct was to refuse, but then she saw Alvin's scrawled initials in the corner. She tucked the note in her planner and finished the day's invoices with a steadier hand than she felt. Perry's Steakhouse in uptown Dallas was a far cry from Loretta's diner. Dim light pooled across white tablecloths, the air hummed with low conversation and the soft clink of expensive glassware. Sandra felt out of place the moment she stepped inside, smoothing the sleeve of her thrift store blazer. A host led her to a booth near the back where Alvin was already seated, jacket draped neatly over the leather bench, phone face down beside his glass of iced tea. "You found it," he said, rising slightly. "Good. You'd be surprised how many people get lost between Oak Cliff and uptown." "Traffic lights have a different accent out here," Sandra replied, a hint of dry humor softening her nerves. He grinned. "Sit. Order whatever you like. Their pork chop's famous, but the steak's worth the trouble." She opened the menu mostly for show. Prices read like social tests. Alvin waved off the waiter, leaning forward on his elbows. "You still got the old skill set?" She met his eyes. "Better now. Less polite." That earned a quiet chuckle. "That's exactly what I need." He reached into his briefcase and slid a folder across the table. 2 years of financials, bonuses, commissions, incentive payouts. It's messy. I've been hearing whispers about inflated numbers, things that don't add up. You've got the sharpest eyes I've seen in this business. I want you to tell me what's true." Sandra rested her hand on the folder. The weight of it felt personal. Not paper and ink, but a quiet vote of confidence. "You trust me with this?" Alvin sat back, considering her. "I trust you more than anyone in that building." For a long moment, neither spoke. The restaurant's soundtrack, slow jazz and silverware, filled the silence. Then Sandra opened the folder and scanned the first page. Incentive reports, employee IDs, line items that stank of sloppiness. Or worse. She closed it carefully. "How deep do you want me to dig?" "Until it's clean," Alvin said. "No matter where it leads." Her pulse ticked in her throat. She already knew where it might lead. The trail of half-tidied records, the gaps that lined up too neatly under one familiar name, Cody's. "Understood," she said quietly. The waiter returned and they ordered. Steak for him, chicken for her. As they ate, Alvin asked about her years at Auto First, about systems she'd built, about what she thought made a dealership honest. She answered with precision, not performance, the kind of conversation she hadn't had in years, the kind that reminded her of who she used to be before life shrank her world to rent checks and rationed groceries. When dessert menus arrived, she shook her head. "If I eat anything else, you'll have to roll me back to Oak Cliff." Alvin smiled. "You'll expense the meal anyway." Sandra laughed. The sound surprised her. Light and genuine. By the time she stepped outside, the Dallas sun was fierce again, cutting hard reflections off parked cars. She walked a few steps away from the door, the folder tight under her arm, then heard a familiar whistle. Loretta was leaning against her old Buick at the curb, arms crossed, a grin wide as a payday. "Well, look at you," she called. "From unpaid rent to lunch with the king himself." Sandra rolled her eyes, but she couldn't help smiling. "It was business, Loretta." "Uh-huh," Loretta teased. "And that folder tucked under your arm. That's not a love letter, I take it?" Sandra glanced at the folder, expression sobering. "No, it's something bigger." Loretta studied her friend's face, the way her eyes had sharpened. The quiet steel under her calm. "You look different," she said finally, like a woman who just got handed the steering wheel. Sandra looked toward the skyline, sunlight flashing off the glass towers. Maybe I did, she murmured. The wind picked up, tugging at her hair and the corner of the folder. The one labeled Incentives, Payroll 2022-2023. And deep down, she already knew what name she'd find in the mess. The next few nights blurred into one long stretch of paper and silence. Sandra sat at her kitchen table beneath the hum of her old ceiling fan, the folder spread open like an autopsy. Every line of ink, every decimal, told a story. And by the second night, that story stopped pretending to be innocent. The fraud wasn't sloppy, it was methodical. Whoever had done it knew the system, knew where the cracks were. The incentive payouts looped through ghost accounts, credits folded into bonuses that didn't exist on paper. But she saw the rhythm, the way one ID number repeated, always a digit off from Cody's actual employee code. It was his handwriting on the approval slips that clinched it. His initials, CB, scrawled on two invoices that should have never touched his desk. One in March, one in June. Two clerical errors that had quietly cost the company almost 15 grand. Sandra's stomach knotted. She pushed her chair back and stood, pacing the small kitchen. Her reflection in the dark window watched her like a stranger. He didn't just forget where he came from, she thought. He started selling it off in pieces. By morning, the decision was made. Alvin's office was quiet when she knocked, early enough that the dealership lights hadn't fully warmed up. He looked up from his desk, reading her face before he even spoke. "Found something," he said. She placed the folder in front of him. "Two things, actually." Alvin flipped through the sheets, eyes scanning like a man confirming what he already suspected. "Walk me through it," Sandra pointed. Incentive adjustments tied to inventory bonuses. These were entered post-sale, logged as manual corrections, but they weren't. They were diversions. He followed her finger, brow furrowing. "How much?" 14,600 and change, not all in one go. Small pulls, quiet, the kind that don't set off alerts. Alvin's jaw hardened. He skimmed from incentives. "Twice," Sandra said, her voice steady, though her throat burned. "Once last quarter, once this one. Same signature, same routing path." For a long moment neither spoke. The office felt too still, the air thick with the hum of the fluorescent light. Alvin finally leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. "That'll end today," he said. He reached for his intercom, pressing a button. "HR, set up a performance review for Cody Bell. 3 o'clock sharp. I'll sit in." Sandra watched his composure. Calm, deliberate, but behind his eyes, something sharp was cutting through the restraint. "You sure you want to be in the room for that?" Alvin asked. Sandra hesitated. "I started it. I'll finish it." Alvin nodded. "Then we'll finish it right." By mid-afternoon, the building felt different. Energy charged the air. Whispers carried down the hall. Screens flickered brighter. Conversations dimmed when Sandra passed. Cody noticed. He'd been pacing his office since lunch, tapping the corner of his monitor, pretending to work. But something about the atmosphere, the sudden hush, the closed-door meetings, it all prickled. When he saw Alvin and Sandra through the glass wall of HR, heads bent over a folder, his pulse jumped. No. No way. He returned to his desk and opened the internal system, hands shaking as he typed. Incentive logs, bonus entries. He scanned through them, deleting what he could. Each confirmation box popped up like an accusation. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he muttered, clicking faster. "I'm sure." But the files didn't vanish cleanly. The dealership's system was backed up nightly, something Sandra had already confirmed. The deletions only made the holes more obvious. Through the glass, Alvin's door opened. HR stepped out. Sandra followed, her expression unreadable. Cody froze mid-keystroke. She looked straight at him. Not angry, not smug, just certain. He minimized the window, forcing a smile that didn't land. "Mom, hey, got a sec?" But she walked past without a word, her heels sharp on the tile. Alvin trailed behind her, speaking quietly to HR. The three disappeared into the conference room. Cody's stomach turned. He shut his laptop, stood, and leaned against the wall. His reflection in the glass stared back, pale, sweating, no trace of the confident man who once owned the floor. Outside, the sky was turning gray again, heavy with the promise of another storm. And in that still moment, before the first crack of thunder, Cody Bell finally realized that the thing closing in on him wasn't bad luck, it was precision. The storm broke just before 3. Rain slapped against the glass front of Nash Automotive, lightning flashing across the polished hoods inside the showroom. By the time Cody Bell heard his name called over the intercom, "Mr. Bell, Mr. Nash would like to see you in his office." His pulse was already racing hard enough to drown it out. He straightened his tie, smoothed his shirt, and walked toward the conference wing. Every step echoed. Every head that turned away felt like judgment. When he entered, Alvin was at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, a folder open before him. Sandra sat off to the side, her posture composed, hands folded neatly on a legal pad. HR hovered near the door, eyes down. "Close the door, Cody," Alvin said. His voice was calm. That was the worst part. Cody obeyed. The sound of the latch catching was too loud. "Sit." He did. Alvin tapped the folder once. "I'm going to walk you through something. I suggest you don't interrupt until I'm done." Cody nodded, throat dry. "These are 2 years of incentive payouts," Alvin began. "Every entry, time-stamped and logged. Now, we run double authentication for all adjustments over $500. Your employee ID shows 37 such adjustments. 2 of them, March and June, don't trace back to valid accounts. The funds were rerouted into ghost bonuses." Cody felt the blood drain from his face. "Sir, I can explain that. Those were probably clerical. My assistant handles those. Mistyped something, maybe." Alvin slid a page across the table. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Your initials are right there." Cody hesitated, then grasped at air. "Right. But that could have been me approving what she entered. I don't." "That assistant quit in May," Alvin cut in, tone clipped. "These logs go through July." Cody's voice cracked. "Then maybe someone's framing me." "That would require them to know your password," Alvin said, leaning forward. "And your private authorization token." Cody looked between them. Alvin stone-faced, HR silent, and Sandra unflinching. He turned toward her, desperate. "Mom, tell him. You know I'd never—" Sandra met his gaze, the quiet steel in her eyes almost unbearable. "You don't have to lie, Cody. The audit trail's clean." "Wait. You're the one who found this?" His voice rose an octave, cracking. "You went digging through my files?" "I was asked to audit them," she said simply. "And I did." He stood, chair scraping. "This is insane. You're letting her—" "Sit down, Belle." Alvin's tone dropped, firm enough to slice through the air. "You're not going to shout your way out of this." Cody sat trembling. Alvin turned to Sandra. "For confirmation, who entered the documentation that caught the duplicate ID?" "I did," she said. "Those were my pull logs." Cody's shoulders sagged. His world, polished and loud and self-made, collapsed to a single sound, the soft tap of rain on glass. Alvin shut the folder. "I built this dealership on trust. When people skim, I don't call it a mistake. I call it theft. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated." Cody blinked, unable to process the words. "You're firing me? You can't just—" Alvin stood. "Security will escort you out. You'll receive your final check once we've cleared the audit. Cody opened his mouth again, but no sound came. He looked at Sandra one last time, waiting for something. Mercy, maybe, or even anger. But she gave him nothing. Only quiet certainty. When he finally left, the sound of the door shutting behind him echoed like punctuation. An hour later, the dealership floor had returned to its rhythm. The rain lightened to a drizzle. Sandra sat in Alvin's office again, signing off on new reports. Her phone buzzed beside the keyboard. Unknown number, but she didn't need to check who it was. Tamara. You ruined everything. Sandra stared at the message, thumb hovering for only a second before she typed back. Sandra. I corrected everything. She set the phone down and exhaled, the tension leaving her in pieces. Across the desk, Alvin watched her. You all right? Sandra nodded. I will be. He smiled faintly, then reached into his drawer and pulled out a new nameplate. The brushed steel gleamed under the office lights. Sandra Bell, Operations Lead. Her breath caught. Full-time, Alvin said. You earned it. Nobody keeps my house in order like you. Sandra looked down at the nameplate, fingers brushing over the engraved letters. For a moment, she didn't trust her voice. Outside, the sky was clearing. Light broke through the storm clouds, scattering across the wet pavement below. In that reflection, for the first time, she saw her own face, not just tired or determined, but sure. The same dealership that had once turned her away was now under her steady hand. And the son who'd built his name on her back had finally learned what happens when the ground you stand on decides to stop holding you up. The dealership had a different rhythm now. Quieter, sharper, more deliberate. The chaos that once hummed around Cody's office had dissolved, replaced by an undercurrent of something heavier: respect. 2 weeks after his termination, Sandra Bell walked through the glass doors of Nash Automotive and didn't stop at the front desk. She climbed the staircase, the one she used to pass with her eyes down, and stepped into a corner office with her name etched on the frosted glass. Sandra Bell, Operations Lead. Her new office was modest but sunlit, the view stretching across the service bays and the Dallas skyline beyond. A single plant sat by the window, its leaves trembling in the air conditioning. She stood there for a long moment before touching the desk, grounding herself. Downstairs, whispers trailed in her wake when she walked the floor. Not gossip this time, reverence. She's the new lead, someone murmured near the finance wing. Nash handpicked her. Even the ones who didn't like her respected her. That was enough. By Thursday, the news had spread beyond the dealership. Tamara showed up in a fitted blazer and stilettos, face set in a perfect mask of fury. She went straight to HR, waving a manila folder. I'm filing a wrongful termination complaint on behalf of my husband, she announced. HR, having already been briefed by legal, listened patiently as she talked, and then slid a copy of the signed documents across the desk. Performance violations, time-stamped emails, fraudulent adjustments, final severance confirmation. Mrs. Bell, the HR manager said gently, your husband's termination was by the book. You're welcome to have an attorney review the file, but I assure you, everything here is airtight. Tamara's jaw twitched. This isn't over, she said, snatching up her papers. But it was. She stormed past the sales floor, heels echoing like gunfire. Employees turned back to their monitors as Sandra stepped quietly out of her office, calm as still water. Tamara caught sight of her near the staircase. For a second their eyes met, one full of rage, the other of unshakable calm. Mrs. Nash, Automotive herself, Tamara sneered. Sandra didn't flinch. Drive safe, Tamara, she said. It's a slippery world out there. That evening, a knock came at her office door. Loretta leaned in, holding a dented silver thermos like contraband. You didn't think I'd let your promotion go dry, did you? She said. Sandra smiled, motioning her in. You brought champagne in a thermos? Budget-friendly elegance, Loretta said, pouring into 2 paper cups. Same thing we used when your kid graduated high school. Only this time, I actually mean congratulations. They clinked cups. The cheap bubbles fizzed between laughter. Loretta took a sip and leaned back. So, what's it like being queen of the castle? Sandra looked out over the floor below, where salesmen hurried between desks and the service bay echoed with tools. It's not a castle, she said softly. It's a business that remembers who built it. Loretta grinned. You're gonna be fine. When her friend left, the quiet settled again, but this time it didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. In the weeks that followed, Alvin began deferring more and more decisions to her. Budget for the 4th quarter? He'd ask, sliding spreadsheets her way. You've got the instincts. Go with what feels right? He started CCing her on every major vendor negotiation, every legal draft, every new hire proposal. You run the bones, Alvin told her once. I'll handle the shine. It was a partnership built on trust, not flattery, the kind of respect no title alone could earn. On Sunday, she drove to the cemetery just outside Oak Cliff. The grass was brittle from the summer heat, the stone marker faded but familiar. She knelt, brushing a leaf from the name, James Bell. For a while, she didn't speak. Just listened to the wind and the faint hum of traffic on the nearby highway. Then she exhaled, slow and steady. He forgot where he came from, she said quietly. I didn't. The words hung in the warm air, neither bitter nor boastful, just true. She placed a small dealership keychain beside the stone, the Nash Automotive logo catching the light. It wasn't a trophy. It was proof. As she stood, the wind picked up again, tugging at her blazer. Somewhere beyond the trees, thunder rolled faintly, distant but promising. Sandra smiled faintly, locking her car door behind her. She had weathered every kind of storm. Now, for the first time, she was the one steering it. The diner sat wedged between a laundromat and a payday loan store, the kind of place where the coffee was burnt. The booth stuck slightly to your hands, and nobody pretended to be better than they were. It was the kind of place Sandra used to call familiar. Now it felt like a test. She slid into a corner booth, the red vinyl groaning beneath her. The waitress poured her a cup without asking, then nodded toward the door. He's been waiting outside 10 minutes. Sandra didn't turn to look. Then he knows where to find me? Moments later, Cody walked in. He looked smaller than she remembered, thinner, paler. His once slick hair overgrown and dull. The swagger was gone, even his shoes had lost their shine. When his eyes found her, he hesitated before crossing the room. Hey, Mom. His voice was soft, almost boyish. Cody. He sat across from her, hands clasped, the faint shake in them betraying nerves he was trying to hide. Thanks for meeting me. She stirred her coffee. You said it was important. He swallowed. It is. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain outside ticked against the windows. Dallas never seemed to stay dry anymore. Finally, Cody drew in a breath. I wanted to say I'm sorry, he began, for everything, for how I treated you, for what I did at the dealership. I wasn't thinking straight. I got caught up trying to be somebody I'm not. Sandra looked at him, not coldly, just measured. She'd imagined this moment before, in dozens of versions. In most, she'd felt something. Anger, pity, maybe even relief. But right now, all she felt was distance. Go on, she said quietly. Cody's eyes flicked up, rehearsed sincerity in every line. I messed up. I know that. But losing everything, the job, the house, Tamara, It woke me up. I'm trying to start over. I've been reaching out to dealerships, but he laughed softly, bitterly. Turns out people don't line up to hire someone with a termination for cause on their record. Sandra said nothing. So, he continued, voice breaking slightly, I was wondering if you'd talk to Mr. Nash for me, just to vouch. Not to get me my job back. Just something. Maybe at one of his sister dealerships. He trusts you. He'd listen. The waitress came by, topped off her cup, and left the check without a word. Sandra folded her hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into her palms before answering. Cody, she said finally, you remember when you were 15 and your dad's truck broke down? He blinked, caught off guard. Yeah. You and I pushed it off the highway. Why? You kept saying it wasn't your fault the radiator cracked. You were mad that we were out there in the heat instead of waiting for a tow. But I told you something that day. He frowned, thinking. I told you, she said evenly, that being sorry doesn't fix the engine. You fix it by not ignoring the red light next time. He sighed, frustration edging in. Mom, I know I messed up. I just need a chance. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, placing it between them. He looked at it, confused. What's this? The number for the Texas Labor Board. They help people who lose jobs after misconduct. They'll walk you through reinstatement processes, re-entry programs, all of it. He stared at the paper like it might burn him. You're kidding. I'm not. His voice rose, cracking around the edges. You're really gonna sit there and hand me a hotline number? After everything I did for you? Sandra's tone stayed level. You did those things for yourself, Cody. You just used my name to get there. He leaned back, blinking hard, the anger fading as quickly as it came. You really don't forgive me? She looked at him, really looked, and felt the old ache stir. The little boy who'd once fallen asleep in her lap was long gone, but traces of him lingered in the slump of his shoulders. I forgive you, she said softly, but I don't trust you. That's something you'll have to rebuild on your own. He nodded faintly, eyes shining. For a second, he looked ready to say something else, but the words never came. He stood, tucked the paper into his pocket, and left without looking back. Sandra watched through the rain-streaked window as he crossed the parking lot, his figure small against the gray afternoon. When he disappeared from view, she took a long breath and finished her coffee. It had gone cold, but the bitterness didn't bother her, because for the first time, the aftertaste didn't belong to regret. The days at Nash Automotive began to move differently now, smoother, quieter, but with Sandra's rhythm running through them. The staff didn't question her decisions anymore, they anticipated them. Where Cody once demanded attention, she simply commanded it. Every morning, she arrived 15 minutes before opening, the hum of the lights and the faint scent of leather filling her corner office. By 8, her inbox was already half cleared. By 9, Alvin was usually at her door. He didn't knock. He just leaned against the frame, coffee in hand, and said, You've got that look. What look? The one you get before you fix something I didn't know was broken. That morning, he placed a thick folder on her desk. Policy revisions, time to modernize, health benefits, PTO, maternity leave, you name it. Last update was before smartphones existed. Sandra opened the folder, scanning through the outdated language. The maternity policy alone was 3 paragraphs long and worth less than a half tank of gas. She looked up. You trust me with this? Trust isn't a gift, Alvin said. It's payroll. And then he smiled. You've earned plenty of both. The revisions took weeks, but by the end, the policy book looked nothing like the one she'd been handed. Her notes filled the margins. Raises tied to tenure, longer leave periods, flexible scheduling for working parents. When she presented the final draft to the department heads, the younger staff blinked, stunned. "You're giving us 12 weeks paid maternity?" one woman asked, wide-eyed. "That's unheard of here." Sandra smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's about time we set a better example." Another piped up. "And these tuition reimbursements? You serious about those?" "If you're serious about learning," she said, "we invest in engines without blinking. Why not, people?" By the end of the meeting, a low buzz filled the room, admiration wrapped in disbelief. Sandra gathered her papers, unfazed by the whispers following her out. Back in her office, Alvin was waiting again, his tone a quiet mix of approval and awe. "You just made me the most progressive dealership owner in Texas." She smirked. "Careful. People might think you've got a heart." "Not me," he said. "That's all you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a raised letter and a key fob. "The pay bump's automatic," he said. "And the keys. They're for your new car. Top floor benefit." Sandra looked down at the sleek black fob, the logo shining under the light. A company car. The same luxury brand she used to scrub fingerprints off when she was cleaning loaner vehicles years ago. For a second she couldn't speak. Then, softly, "Thank you." Alvin gave her a nod and headed for the door. "You've earned your quiet life, Sandra. Don't forget to enjoy it once in a while." That night, Loretta showed up at her apartment with takeout, and the same grin she'd worn since the beginning. "I can't even keep up with you anymore," she said, plopping onto the couch. "One day you're counting quarters for coffee, and the next you've got staff calling you ma'am like you're corporate royalty." Sandra chuckled, opening the wine. "It's just a job, Loretta." "Uh-huh." Loretta took a long sip. "And that shiny new car out front? That's just a ride too?" Sandra laughed, shaking her head. "Don't start." Loretta pointed at her, playful but proud. "Damn, girl! You built a new version of you." Sandra leaned back, glass in hand, eyes softening. "No," she said after a moment. "I just stopped hiding her." The room went quiet except for the hum of the ceiling fan. The woman Loretta was looking at, calm, confident, unhurried, wasn't new at all. She'd just been buried under years of compromise. When Loretta left, Sandra stood at the window, watching the city lights pulse in the distance. She caught her reflection in the glass, steady, strong, a woman she finally recognized. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Alvin. "Board wants to meet next week. Big opportunity." She smiled, setting the phone down beside her wine. Outside, the city skyline glimmered. A quiet invitation to something even larger waiting on the horizon. Sandra turned off the lights, the faint gleam of the car key still visible on the counter. For the first time, she didn't wonder what came next. She was already building it. Cody Bell's world had gotten smaller. The man who used to stride through the gleaming floors of Nash Automotive now lived out of a duffel bag and kept his suits on hangers in the back seat of a borrowed car. The dealership polo shirt he once wore with pride was stuffed under the seat, the embroidered logo fading from too much sunlight and shame. He couch-surfed between friends who stopped answering his texts after the first week. The recruiters he emailed stopped responding after the first background check. Every rejection came faster than the one before. It wasn't just bad luck. His name had become a warning. The job he'd built his identity on was gone, and with it went the marriage that had once seemed as shiny and untouchable as the cars he sold. It came on a Tuesday morning, a thick white envelope wedged between pizza flyers and overdue bills. The return address was a law firm in Frisco. He didn't have to open it to know. Inside, the papers were cold and factual. Petition for divorce. Tamara Bell versus Cody Bell. The reason box was checked neatly. Financial instability. There was a note clipped to the front in Tamara's handwriting. "You've become a liability. Please don't contact me." He stared at the words until the ink blurred. Then he laughed. Not out of humor, but the raw, helpless kind that comes when the ground finally stops pretending to hold you. 2 nights later, Loretta was closing the diner when Sandra stopped in for her usual decaf. The world had moved on for everyone but Cody, and Sandra wasn't sure if that was justice or tragedy. Loretta slid a mug her way and smirked. "You hear about Tamara filing those papers?" Sandra stirred her coffee slowly. "I heard." "Well," Loretta said, wiping the counter with deliberate slowness. "Looks like the trash took itself out." Sandra shot her a look, half warning, half weary amusement. "That's not kind." "Neither was she," Loretta countered. "Besides, some lessons don't need sympathy. They need silence." Sandra didn't argue. She took a sip instead, the bitterness sitting easy on her tongue. It was just past midnight when Sandra pulled into her apartment lot, headlights slicing through the damp night. The rain had returned, thin and steady, drumming softly on the windshield. She almost missed the figure sitting on the steps near her door, shoulders slumped, head in his hands. Cody. For a moment she didn't move, just watched him through the glass. The boy she'd raised was gone, but the shape of him, the curve of his spine, the weary tilt of his head, hit her in a place she'd tried to harden. She stepped out, keys still in hand. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. He looked up, eyes red, rain dripping from his hair. "I didn't know where else to go." Sandra sighed. "You've got friends." "Not anymore," he said. "And Tamara." He laughed, short and hollow. "Tamara made sure of that." She stood a few feet away, the distance between them measured not in steps but in years. "I always told you this world doesn't forgive arrogance," she said. He nodded, staring at the wet pavement. "You always warned me." His voice cracked. "I should have listened." Sandra looked at him for a long time. The anger had burned itself out months ago, leaving something quieter behind, a grief shaped like understanding. "I also fed you," she said softly. He looked up, confused. "I didn't just warn you," she continued. "I kept you alive, gave you every tool to build a better life. What you do with it now, that's on you." He nodded again, silent this time. "Go home, Cody," she said. He hesitated. "I don't have one." She unlocked her door and gestured toward the covered walkway. "You can sleep out of the rain tonight. Couch only." He looked like he wanted to say more, but she'd already turned away. By morning, the rain had stopped. Cody was gone. The couch cushions were still damp from his jacket, a folded blanket left neatly on the armrest. Sandra brewed coffee and sat by the window, the quiet wrapping around her like armor. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel anger toward him, just inevitability. She was rinsing her mug when she heard the knock. A courier at her door, envelope in hand. "Delivery for Ms. Bell, from Dallas Trust Bank." Sandra frowned, signing for it. Inside was a single-page statement from an account she hadn't touched in years. An old joint savings account she'd kept open in Cody's name back when he was in college. The balance line glared up at her, 0 Her breath caught. Below, the transaction history told the rest, a full withdrawal processed 2 days ago, by C. Bell. The air left her lungs in a slow, steady rush. Outside, the clouds gathered again, gray, heavy, ready to break. Sandra set the paper on the counter and stared out the window, jaw tightening. He hadn't just come home for forgiveness. He'd come for what little she had left untouched. And as the thunder rolled in from the distance, she whispered to herself, steady as steel. Not this time. The next morning broke gray and brittle, the air carrying that faint chill Dallas sometimes got when the storm finally wrung itself out. Sandra sat at her kitchen table with the empty statement spread before her like a confession. The numbers were small compared to what she'd seen in her career, but they carried more weight than any ledger she'd ever balanced. He'd taken what was left of her safety net, the last echo of years she'd scraped through to give him everything. By 9, she was downtown. Dallas Trust Bank loomed cool and glassy, its lobby polished to a shine that made her reflection look unfamiliar, sharper, somehow. She walked straight to the teller, statement in hand. "I need to see Gina Morales," she said. Moments later, Gina appeared from a side door, her navy suit pressed crisp, her expression warm but alert. "Sandra Bell," she greeted, voice dipping into concern. "You all right? You look like someone's about to owe you money." Sandra handed her the statement. "My son emptied this account 2 days ago. It was joint, from when he was in school. I never closed it." Gina skimmed the page, eyebrows knitting. "Withdrawal in person, Oak Cliff branch." She glanced up. "He used his ID?" "Apparently." Gina exhaled, already moving into action. "All right, we'll need to open a fraud file. It's technically misuse of a shared account, but given your age, income, and the lack of consent, it qualifies as elder financial exploitation under Texas code." Sandra blinked. "Elder exploitation?" "Don't take it personal," Gina said with a small smile. "It's just how the law lets me throw the book at him." Sandra let out a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sigh. "Good." Gina pulled a digital form onto her screen. "I'll start the complaint. Once it's submitted, the system automatically flags his ID for transactional holds at every branch tied to this region. If he tries to move anything else, it'll bounce." Sandra nodded, steady. "Do it." An hour later, Gina slid the printed forms across the desk for signature. "This authorizes a freeze and restitution investigation. Once it's approved, funds traced to him can be recovered through civil order." Sandra signed without hesitation. "How long does that take?" "Depends on cooperation from his bank. But you'll get it back," Gina assured. "And Sandra?" "Yes?" "You're not the first mother who's had to do this. Don't you dare feel guilty for protecting what's yours." Sandra met her eyes. "Guilt left the building the second he took my name off that balance." Gina smiled softly. "That's the spirit." By that afternoon, the dealership's legal team was already in motion. Alvin's assistant called her at work. "Heard what happened," Alvin said over the speakerphone later that evening. "My legal counsel's filing companion paperwork with the DA's office. We'll make sure it sticks." "I didn't ask you to—" He interrupted, his tone firm but kind. "You didn't have to. You keep my house clean. I help you keep yours. That's how loyalty works." For the first time in days, she let herself breathe. "Thank you, Alvin." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We're not done. When he gets that first freeze notice, it'll hit him harder than any lecture ever could." Sandra stared at the faint reflection of herself in her office window. The calm set of her shoulders, the sure tilt of her chin. "He'll learn," she said quietly. "Maybe not fast, but he'll learn." 3 days later, it started. Cody's name hit the regional fraud alert system. A credit freeze followed. Loan applications bounced. The car he'd been using was repossessed when an automatic payment failed. Sandra didn't celebrate. She didn't even smile. She simply noted the quiet shift in the air, the weight of balance being restored. That weekend, she stopped by the grocery store for the first real shop she'd done in months. Fresh produce, bread that wasn't on discount, a full gallon of milk, not the half she used to ration. At home, she unpacked everything carefully, filling her fridge until it hummed with life again. Grapes in a bowl, lettuce washed, a carton of eggs stacked neatly on the shelf. The silence of her apartment felt different now. No longer lonely, but secure. Her phone buzzed. A text from Gina. "Account frozen. Case accepted. You'll see funds returned within 10 days." Sandra stared at the message, then exhaled through a quiet, tired smile. She poured herself a glass of milk, sat at the small kitchen table, and took the first full breath she'd had all week. Through the window, thunder rolled faintly again, not a threat this time, but a promise. Because some storms didn't destroy things, they cleared the air. Morning sunlight streamed through the glass walls of the executive suite, throwing gold lines across the polished floor. Nash Automotive had never felt quieter, steadier, like a machine finally running on well-oiled truth. Sandra Bell sat behind her desk, pen poised over a stack of contracts stamped with her new title. Vice President of Operations. The letters gleamed in the corner of the page, clean and sure. It had taken 6 decades, a dozen storms, and one hard fall from grace. But she'd built her way here brick by careful brick. A soft knock came at the door. Alvin stepped in, holding something wrapped in brown paper. "Didn't want HR handling this one," he said, setting it on her desk. She peeled the wrapping away to reveal a brushed steel nameplate heavier than it looked. Sandra Bell, VP, Operations. Alvin smiled, watching her fingertips brush across the letters. "Figured it ought to come from the person who saw what you could do before you remembered it yourself." Sandra stood, shaking his hand. "You've got a funny way of saying thank you." He grinned. "You've got a funny way of earning it." He paused at the doorway, looking around her office. The neatly arranged binders, the faint scent of jasmine from the vase by the window. "Looks good on you," he said. "The power. The peace." Sandra smiled faintly. Took a while to fit. When he left, she set the nameplate down on her desk, straightened it once, and sat back. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was filling someone else's chair. It felt like it had been waiting for her all along. That afternoon, Loretta showed up, dressed in a floral blouse loud enough to draw glances from the front desk. "Lord, this place smells like leather and ego," she announced, hands on hips. Sandra laughed. "Loretta, what are you doing here?" "Came to make sure you're not forgetting where you came from," she said, winking. "And to collect on that lunch you promised me back when you were still eating diner pie." Sandra leaned back, arms crossed. "You still like the Ritz?" Loretta's grin widened. "Oh, I knew I should have worn heels." They sat in Sandra's office for a while, sipping coffee from real mugs instead of paper ones. When Loretta saw the new nameplate, she whistled low. "VP of Operations. Fancy words for runs the damn place, huh?" Sandra chuckled. "Something like that." Loretta's tone softened. "You did it, girl. You turned all that pain into power." Sandra looked out the window, down at the lot filled with gleaming cars. "No," she said. "I just made sure it meant something." Later that week, 2 young women from finance knocked on her door. "We heard you're reviewing applications for mentorship," one said, nervous but eager. Sandra gestured for them to sit. "What do you want out of this business?" The first woman answered immediately. "Money. Stability." The second hesitated. "Respect." Sandra nodded. "Then here's the truth. You'll have to be twice as sharp, half as loud, and always prepared to be underestimated. But if you learn to see through people instead of around them, you'll never fall behind again." They hung on every word. It wasn't the advice printed in books. It was the kind that came from scars. When they left, one of them turned at the door. "Thanks, Ms. Bell. I didn't think someone like you would have time for someone like me." Sandra smiled gently. "Someone like me is exactly who you're supposed to learn from." 2 weeks later, she stood behind a podium at a local job fair, the kind where second chances looked like resumes printed on borrowed paper. The room was full of people who'd been written off, just like she once had. "I started in finance when calculators were heavier than your laptops," she began, her voice carrying calm authority. "I was told to be grateful just to have a desk. I stayed quiet when people spoke over me. But one day I realized silence doesn't protect dignity, work does. A ripple of quiet fell over the room. So, if you're sitting here wondering if it's too late, or too hard, or too broken to fix, it's not. She said simply, I'm proof. When she stepped down, the applause wasn't loud, but it was real. The kind that sank into the bones. That evening, back in her office, Sandra found an envelope tucked under her door. No return address. Just her name, written in familiar handwriting. She opened it carefully. Mom, I've been doing day jobs, trying to get back on my feet. The bank called. They said the funds were restored. I know what that means. I was angry at first, but I get it now. You didn't ruin me. You saved me from what I was turning into. I finally get it. Cody Sandra folded the letter slowly, eyes tracing the shaky pen strokes. For the first time, there was no sting, no hollow ache. Only a quiet certainty that she'd done what needed doing. She slipped the letter into her drawer beside the first dealership badge she'd ever worn, the one from years ago that simply read, Accounts Clerk. Her phone buzzed with a reminder. Another policy meeting at 8 tomorrow. Another day of work to be done. She stood, straightened her jacket, and glanced out the window at the glowing city below. The skyline shimmered, the dealership lights winking in the distance like a constellation she'd drawn herself. Sandra smiled. He sold cars. I built an empire.